All right, we'll get started now with the webinar. So I'm Danielle Robertson-Boersma. I'm the Funding Programs Officer here at SHRF, and I'm also the Program Manager when it comes to the Research Connections. So I'm your first point of contact. Usually I can answer all of your questions, and if I can't, I will find the right person that can. So just a couple things before we get started. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those through the Q&A panel. I've got it open here in front of me, and what'll happen is I'll either answer it live if it's related to that slide that I'm on right now, or what I might do is I might answer it in a couple slides later, just because there's a possibility that I'll be talking about that information. So instead of answering it beforehand, I'll bring it up before or when it comes to that slide. Otherwise, it may be that I just leave that question to the end. So don't worry, I will see it and I will make sure to answer it to the best that I can. So let's get started. So just looking at what's going to be happening today. So regarding our agenda, I'm going to go over what is Research Connections. This is the first webinar for Research Connections, and since its update last year, I kind of want to give a little bit of an overview. Then we'll go into who can apply, because this is a bit different than some of our other grants that we offer at SHRF. I'll go into the difference between an event and an activity now that we've introduced the activity. Looking at those requirements when it comes to each of the applications, and then finally important dates. And within this, I'll also be giving examples when it comes to previous applications and who we've funded, and then also looking at kind of examples when it comes to the matching funding and everything like that. So just to get started, we want to give you a bit of an overview. This is a very, perfect line of how research knowledge is generated, so if everything works out, but we do know that sometimes you may be stuck in certain areas of this, but I'll just go over it. So the first thing is you want to start with an idea. So that's that research idea that you have, that idea, the light bulb in that first picture. And then when you have that idea, what you need to do is you need to get it funded. So that if we're sticking with SHRF examples, maybe you're applying to our Collaborative Innovation Development Grant, the Sprout, Leader, our Inspire grant, anything like that. And if you're successful, you'll be funded, obviously, hopefully. And what that does is you then begin to research the idea. You're looking into it through the methodologies that you've identified in your project. You're coming up with answers, whether you like the answers or not, but there is something being developed. And from that, you're getting your results. So that's where that little I comes in, is you're showing based on your idea, something has come out of it through your research. And so you publish it within our traditional areas, usually through your journals. Maybe you're going to academic conferences. So you're sharing it with your peers, getting that validation. And then that final step is getting it out to those users. Outside of our regular academic circle, we're looking to get it to the knowledge users. And that's kind of where Research Connections can come in to help you. Not so much when it comes to the journal publication and the traditional. I'll get into a bit more of that. But we're looking at how we can help you with our funding, because we are asking for you to, in most of our grants, to be able to share your information to the knowledge users. So how you can do that, and that's how Research Connections comes in. So just getting into what is Research Connections. So we have a program guide for each of our programs, and this is the same thing when it comes to Research Connections now. And within there, there's a purpose. And for the purpose of the Research Connections grant is that it supports short-term targeted human health research knowledge mobilization initiatives that take place in and that have a practical application for knowledge users in Saskatchewan. So there's a lot of key words in there. You want to make sure when you're applying that what you're applying with is a short-term and targeted project or post-project knowledge mobilization initiative that's focused on human health research. For SHRF, that can be quite broad. It could be anything from basic to applied and from biomedical to socio-health. So if you have questions regarding that, you can always email me. And something that's also very important, because we are the provincial funding agency, we work to support the province. So making sure that if you're doing an event, it's taking place in Saskatchewan, both for the events and activity, that there's an application within Saskatchewan for those knowledge users. That doesn't mean that what you're doing may not go out nationally and internationally, but the focus is for Saskatchewan. So with that, we do have an envelope that's applied every year to the grant. This, for the 2018-19 year, it'll be $150,000 that we can spend. So that's divided, we tried to divide it out between the three application deadlines, but obviously we can maybe go over a little bit or it might be under depending on intake. For you specifically, when you're applying, you can ask for up to $10,000 in matching funds from SHRF. And I'll get more into those matching contributions and what that looks like. But when you are asked in your application how much you would like from SHRF, it's up to a maximum of $10,000. And then finally, going into just general requirements. So what we're asking for, whether you're applying for an event or for an activity, there's a couple things to keep in mind. So as I said, making sure that that request is a maximum of $10,000. And then going into a couple points, you want to make sure that you're fostering the dissemination and the exchange of health research knowledge. Again, you've already done the research as we showed in that little image that we have for you. And now what you're trying to do is take what you've collected from your research and sending it out to your knowledge users. It needs to occur in Saskatchewan. That is an eligibility requirement. We want you to involve individuals from more than one group or discipline. And this isn't, it's not limited to, but we should include researchers, students, health professionals, those policymakers, anything like patients and families, government, health charities, community members, and the public. It can go on and on. But even when we're doing more of a traditional event, you may have researchers involved. It might be specifically related to a cancer event, for example. But making sure you also have students involved, and that knowledge user could be a health professional that's going to take the research that you've done related to cancer and apply it into their field. So that's something to keep in mind from a traditional event to when you're applying for an activity. You'll also need to identify the knowledge user. They don't need to be a co-applicant on the application. That's up to you. But when it comes to how you're getting your event or activity out, you want to say this is how we'll involve the knowledge users. And I'll give some examples in a little bit. And you'll also want to identify the possible benefits that they'll receive from your event or outreach activity. Whether that's if they come to the event and they have this information to share with their clients, or if it's very specifically related to the community members, how they could use the information that you're sharing. So you'll want to identify how the event or outreach activity will create ongoing engagements. It's always good to see from something that we funded how there might be a continuation. Sometimes it might be a very short one, just about how people have connected with other individuals, maybe at a conference that you want to hold, or maybe there's some more long-term engagement. I won't get in when it comes to the general applications. I'm not going to talk about that matching funding yet. We've got slides for that for you guys, but I will go into, we do encourage out-of-province participation as appropriate, but it's not a requirement to have out-of-province. If you're bringing a speaker in from another province in Canada, that's always good. It's nice to share that information from other areas, but you don't have to bring someone in order to be funded. One thing, because we aren't funding the research, but when it comes to the research connections, that should have already been done. But what we do need to see that the information that you're sharing is based on legitimate and vetted research. So the event or the outreach activity may or may not be directly related to a funded research project. You don't need to say specifically that this is coming from, say, a SHRF establishment grant or a SHRF CID or something from CIHR, but you do need to show that this is legitimate research and it's been vetted by your peers. This needs to produce timely and concrete deliverables. So we do identify that this is a short term and we want to see what those concrete deliverables are and that they're produced in a timely manner. I'll get into timelines when it comes to the events and the activities in a little bit. Make sure that you're including a budget where all line items are evident and justified in the application. So when you're sharing your budget with us, you'll want to make sure that every line that you fill out comes back to the purpose of why you're doing this event or activity, and making sure that those budget lines are justified in your application. So it's not leaving any questions as to why you may have information or a budget line regarding maybe when it comes to having an extra meal, like with events and everything. Why is this meal happening before the event? Give a reason for it, and then at least it doesn't leave any questions when it comes to the internal review. A new thing for both, we haven't really done this before, but this year we have implemented it, or I guess last year, is to contain an evaluation component, and that's to measure the desired outcomes of the event or outreach activity. Many of you in previous years that have applied usually do identify that you're going to be doing something like this, but now we actually want to see it. So for an event, again, when it's a conference, it might be something very short and specific that you just send out to those who are attending the conference, asking 4 to 5 simple questions. When it comes to the outreach activity, it could be as simple as that, or it might be a little bit more in depth. And same thing with the event, it might be a bit more in depth just to see did they get the desired outcomes that you were trying to do, and then we can get that information and see that the Research Connections is helping and supporting you as the principal applicant and co-applicants to getting your knowledge out there. And then finally, just another general application requirement is that it's supporting SHRF strategic goals. Again, we have a strategic plan, and what we're trying to do is making sure that that research and that knowledge is getting out to the knowledge users in order to create a vibrant culture within Saskatchewan and supporting health research in our environment. So the next thing is to identify who can apply. So like every grant that we offer, there's always a principal applicant. We do in the Research Connections, because this isn't as traditional as some of our other ones, we do have a definitions page. So if you're not familiar when it comes to these terms that I'm talking about, pages 2 to 3 will give you information regarding that. But the principal applicant, just to be very brief, is the individual who submits the application. Usually they're the one that do the majority of the writing, or at least getting it in there. And they're our main contact when it comes to SHRF. If we have any questions, we always contact the principal applicant, and then you'll administer with any issues with the reporting, making sure that that gets in on time. If we have budget questions, we'll be asking the principal applicant. So you're the one that's responsible for the grant. But then you also you might be applying with co-applicants. We really want to see that with the Research Connections. And those individuals may have specific roles. Maybe they might actually be filling in the reporting for you because they might have certain knowledge. And that's fine, but it's the principal applicant who will be that main contact and who's mainly responsible when it comes to the grant. And then we also identify the Saskatchewan organization. So a nice thing with the Research Connections is that you don't have to be at one of the institutions that have a memorandum of understanding with SHRF. This grant can actually be applied by individuals who are at a Saskatchewan organization that have a health research interest. So if you're a nonprofit, if you're one of our funding partners, anything like that, you guys are able to look into this and possibly apply. Again, it's always good to maybe have a researcher involved with you, just because when we're talking about that vetted research, it's nice to have them involved, but by all means, the principal applicant does not need to be someone from one of those 5 institutions that we have an MOU with. And just if you need examples or anything like that, we've identified the CRA, and you can look at the qualified donees, and that should give you a list of individuals who can apply. So moving in, so once you've identified who your principal applicant is, who your co-applicants are, and who that organization is, another point with the organization too, just to know, is that they have to make sure that they're eligible to administer the grant funding. So that organization will be where we send the funds to, and they have to be able to give us a statement of account so that we can make sure that when the funding is spent, and we can check those budget lines and make sure that funding was spent according to what the grant purpose is. So just another note with that Saskatchewan organization. So moving in, to when you're trying to decide if it's an event or an activity. So you have your research, you're wanting to share it out, but you're not sure which way you should go. This just gives a brief idea to help you out. So when it's an event, you're bringing a population together for a one-time gathering, and this could be in the form of a conference, a workshop, a poster day. We've had And this is something that we've had in the past where you could have, again, I'll just use as an example, we do have a Cancer Day conference that's been held for a couple years, and that's where they're bringing in people to a certain area to find out information. When we see an activity, what you're doing is you're reaching out to the population to provide a service or share knowledge in the form of a creative delivery of research knowledge. Again, I'll go into some examples. This is our first year doing it, but what we're seeing is that you're taking the information and you're bringing it to the population, whether that's bringing it into a community or if it's bringing it, if you're in Saskatoon and you're going to certain areas, we've seen things where there's going to be a publication, so they're going to make sure that that publication gets to the individuals instead of them having to go and find it. Another one that we've done involves a documentary, and I'll talk more about it in a bit, but where they're going to do the showings and everything for that documentary and getting it out to the population. So that's kind of how we see an event versus an activity. And then when we get more into depth, you'll also see when it comes to timelines and what's required for both of these. So looking at those examples, so a couple of activities that we've had, the first one being Indigenous food in the city knowledge dissemination and exchange. What this is they've actually created a documentary out of the research they've done regarding, it came from SHRF, CIHR, and SHRC. So from there, they've now finished up, they're just finishing up the documentary and they want to get it out to the individuals, to their knowledge users. So now it's talking about traditional and country food and how they may make their way into the Saskatoon population. So they're going to be doing screenings within the certain areas in Saskatoon, inviting their stakeholders who have a stake within the information that's being shared and having those discussions around the documentary. So that documentary is the knowledge that they're sharing to the knowledge users. Another activity that we've funded this year is the Palliative Care 3 Journals publication. And what this one's looking to do is they're taking journal entries from the first palliative care unit that was in Saskatoon, and they're publishing the journals. They've gone through all the work that needs to be done there, and they're going to share these past lived experiences with knowledge users when it comes to education and how palliative care has transformed and what that looks like from the first care unit to now. And then also they're working with this publication. They're trying to begin a policy conversation about end-of-life care. So they've taken information, they've been working with a researcher, they're going to add a little bit when it comes to the importance of these lived experiences. And then they'll also be working to have a couple of little events when it comes to the publication and making sure that it gets out to the right groups. So when it comes to events, again, we've done events before, so not a lot has changed. There's just been some alterations when it comes to the eligibility. But two of them that we'll discuss that were funded this past year was Kidney Health and Wellness Day. So what this is, it's a one-day health fair with various booths and presentations, but it's been sent out to the community. So the area that had research happening, they were involved in everything, and now the researchers are giving all that information to them when it comes to looking at kidney prevention, diagnosis, and management. So that funding will help bring the booth members out there when it comes to nutritionists, when it comes to clinicians. And what they've done too is they've made sure that that fair is running throughout the day and into the evening so that all community members, whether they're working or non-working, can attend. And again, that's considered an event because it's one, even though it's in the community, it's in one space, and the individuals that are seeking the information will have to come to them. Another one that we funded this past year was the Canada Conference on Sports Nutrition and Training. So you can see it's a bit more specific in the area. It's focusing on sports, nutrition, and training. But what they've done is they've identified that it's being held in Saskatchewan, but it actually has international interest, and they had international partners. And it's raising awareness and understanding regarding sports nutrition and exercise training practices. And they brought in knowledge users, so those that are doing the training, they've brought in sports nutritionists. So again, it's more of a specific area of research, but they're bringing in that next group outside of the research to the knowledge users who will then bring that to their clients and hopefully that information will then be shared to them. So for more examples, and I always suggest to go check out who we funded. So you can see the website link at the bottom right there, shrf.ca, who we fund. And what that'll do is kind of give you examples of what's been funded. Specifically look at the 2017-18 year, because that's with the new Research Connections grant and how we've updated everything. But feel free to also look at past years just to get an idea of the kind of different grants that we have funded and supported. So now I'm going to get into the two specific types. There's the event requirements. So when you're going to apply for an event, you'll make sure when you go into the RMS that you're choosing Research Connections, and then it'll say event. And if you're applying for activity, you'll see Research Connections and activity. So regarding requirements for event, this is not for planning meetings, departmental series, training programs, or similar. Again, going back to the purpose, it's looking at that short-term, one-time event. We've had where people will apply each year, if it's or every other year. If it's a conference, that's fine. But we're not here to fund planning meetings. We want you to be getting research out to the knowledge users. We do require that it's face-to-face, but that being said, if there's a potential virtual components, please go ahead and do that. As you can see, we do virtual components. We're doing a webinar right now with you guys. We think using those technologies is a great idea, but we want to still have that face-to-face opportunity where individuals can meet up with the different knowledge users, with students, health and policy individuals, and be able to create those connections. Finally, with the event requirements, this can be open or closed invitation when it comes to the event. You'll just want to make sure maybe in a line or two, just giving us information as to why you may have it closed. But we do understand that sometimes it may just be an invitation only, and there's good reason for it. So looking at the events application, as said, make sure when you're applying on RMS that you are looking at the Research Connections, the event one, not the activities one. And the biggest change from previous Research Connections grants is that there is an evaluation component, and I'll get into that just briefly when I get there. So application components will include, you will need a summary that goes up on the who we fund, so it just needs to be a brief overview of what you're applying for. And what that idea is. Then within the proposal itself, we're asking what the goals and relevance is. So what are the goals of your event? What do you want to get out of this once it's been all completed and you've had your day or 2 days? So be very clear on that. And then we go into, with the eligibility, I'll just be looking to see with who the principal applicant is, the health organization. It may be when you apply with an organization, we might have a little bit back and forth if it isn't one of our MOUs, just to make sure that you do fit within our eligibility. And then what you'll do is you'll go into your event description. So you want to give an overview of what that day or 2 days looks like. And then the new part is that impact and evaluation section. So here we want you to identify, and we do know when it comes to impact, it might not always come out the way you want it, but from those goals, showing what the impact of your research could potentially have on those knowledge users. Giving information on that just shows when the reviewers look at it that you've thought this through and that at least this is what you're trying to get out of the Research Connections grant. And then there's an evaluation component. Again, this is new from previous years. We haven't asked for an evaluation component before, but we want to see that you're taking that extra step to show this is how we're going to at least try to measure those impacts. And it can be quite short. It might just be 5 questions. We do know that people are always being surveyed, so sometimes it can be a bit tedious, but we want to see how you're measuring the impact of your event. Finally, you'll see at the bottom is in the application is event program and promotional materials. So this is where you can, if you've already started working on everything, you can show us the program of the event, any kind of materials you may be using to get the information out to the knowledge users, anything like that that you want to attach there, that's where you can do it. And then we'll get more into the budget again, but just so you know, there is a budget section on the application, and that's where you'll be identifying your matching and in-kind contributions. And that's where you would also be attaching your support letters from those making the contributions. Finally, there's also a signature page. What happens is the principal applicant needs to make sure if they've added any co-applicants, they need to sign off that they know that they're added to this application. That's why we have the signature page, just in case you're not familiar with that step. And then where appropriate, you will also see that there is a signature needed by your research office, but this is for individuals that have or institutions that have an MOU with SHRF. For those of you that are health organizations that do not have an MOU, you don't need to have that area signed, but for principal applicants that do, so if you're at any one of those 5 institutions, you will need your research office to sign off on it. So going more into the event budget, when it comes to this budget, we do require that it's 100% cash contributions. This will make more sense when I get into the activity side of things. But we also do say that in-kind is always a good thing to have on this application, but it will not add up to that contribution that is needed. So that needs to all be cash. And then what you'll need to do is we want to see that you have individuals outside of your area that are interested. So again, if you are getting funding from your college as some of the matching funding, that's awesome. But we also want to see maybe there's another college, whether it's from another university or institution. Maybe there's a partner. Again, I'm just going to use the cancer example, but maybe the Saskatchewan Cancer Agency is interested. And so they might put in a little bit of funding too. Then that way we're seeing that, okay, there's some interest, those knowledge users are interested outside of your research area or your specific team. And then that kind of just helps when it comes to the application to see that there's other individuals that also want to see the information getting out. As you can see, we do have restrictions on using operating grants and startup funding. And again, it comes back to that idea of looking for partners and individuals that are interested in the information outside of your specific team or individuals or groups. That being said, please do contact me if you have any questions regarding your operating grants or startup fundings, or when it comes to any other similar funding, if you had a CIHR or anything like that, we can talk it out, and there are some contexts where it might be appropriate. One more thing too is if you need to have the matching funding up to or more as of what you requested from SHRF. So if you requested $5,000 from SHRF, you need to come up with $5,000 of cash that's matching funding. And that can be, again, from any of those partners that you might be working with, or with your departments or with universities, any of those institutions. So that's the event budget. Now getting into the activities, so that's what's kind of really new when it comes to Research Connections. This isn't for academic journal articles and journal publishing expenses. We want to see that should be more so when it comes to the grants and everything. We want to start looking at more of those different ideas of getting the knowledge out. Again, we do publications, but because that publication is going out to other individuals and it's still a different form than our peer review journal articles. So just getting that out there so everyone knows. Again, and we want to see really, it doesn't have to be this like crazy out there idea, but we just want to see different ways for you getting the information. This gives you a chance to try something out. Maybe you want to turn something that was bench science into a play. I don't know how you would do that. But it might be very interesting, and that's another way to show knowledge users who may not understand that basic science, but how the information relates to them. When it comes to the activity requirements too, I'll talk a bit more about this in the application, but there does need to be an extensive work plan and timeline. So let's just get into that. So again, just like before, the application is very similar to the event. You'll need to have a summary. You'll need to make sure that you identify what the goals and the relevance of your activity is. Be very clear on those, then we can see here's your activity and this is the goal of it and this is how it's relevant to Saskatchewan and to SHRF. You'll want to go into the activity description, so giving an overview of what's happening. This part you don't have to be as descriptive because you will have your work plan, but you do want to make sure that you're giving us an overview of exactly what this activity is trying to do and how it will do it. Then again, going into that impact and evaluation. So we want to see what that activity, how it's going to impact the knowledge users, how your research information will help the community or help the clinicians, whoever that knowledge user is. And again, with the evaluation, making sure that you have something where it's asking a couple of questions, or if you're using some other type of evaluation that's going to measure the impact, the potential impact of your work. Again, with the work plan, you want to be very specific as to this is what's going to happen. This funding is for a year. So when I get into those dates, I'll discuss it a little bit more, but you'll start on a certain date and you'll have 1 year to complete this. And then when it comes to the events, you'll have a specific date, and then you'll have 3 months post the date to finish up the grants and everything. Finally, when it comes to the activity application, you'll want to make sure you have your supporting materials. Again, this is where you can put in that evaluation document. Maybe you already have some information regarding, I'm just trying to think, a manuscript for a play, or if you've got parts of the documentary, you want to show us the trailer, anything like that, please put that in the supporting materials, and then that just gives us a bit more information of where you're at and how you're going to get that information out. So going into the activity budget, so it's a bit different than the event budget. So here you can have you can use in-kind in combination with your cash contributions, but in-kind can only be up to 50%, and you'll have to identify kind of how much that in-kind is. So say you had someone who's willing to volunteer a day a week for a couple of months to help with getting the information out to the individuals. So if they're doing postering, if they're going to be doing mini presentations prior to your activity, and they're willing to do that in kind, you'll just want to say how much that would have cost, if that makes sense. And you'll see if you have specific questions regarding the in-kind, probably send it to my email. I'll have that at the end of the presentation and we can talk that out. And then on top of that, you still need to get 50% of cash requirement or more. So maybe you only have 25% of in-kind covering your matching contributions. Then that means you need to have 75% of cash covering the contributions. And altogether, that would make that 100%, so that when you're requesting for $5,000 from SHRF, you have $5,000 of matching contributions using that cash and in-kind. I do have a question regarding elaborating our definition of operating funds. So yeah, when it comes to operating funds, we're looking at those, if you had a CIHR operating grant, for example, if you haven't written it in the grant that you are going to apply for Research Connections, we'll usually say no, because we want to see you go outside of your own funding to find that extra resources, whether it is department, colleges, faculties, anything like that. But if you have identified in your operating fund that you're going to be holding this event, such as a conference for a certain amount of years, and we've had that happen before, where there was a grant that identified they would be applying to the Research Connections to help, but they'll be doing this event no matter what. So once we see that, then we can go, okay, that would be a time where we would allow for you to apply to Research Connections as matching fundings, because in your operating grant you would identify that this event was going to happen, and the institutions such as CIHR agreed that this event could happen because they allowed for the funding. That's kind of what I mean by operating grants. If it's a very specific grant, maybe just send me the information and we can talk it out and go from there. But what we're trying to do when we say there's restrictions is we want you to go outside of your own area of research or with your team and find someone else that's also interested in what you're doing. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Lemon. So moving on from the activity budget. So we're gonna have so we've also, when it comes to most of our grants, you can only usually apply for one a year. So establishment, you can only apply once a year until you're successful. CID, you can only have one as principal applicant. But with the research connections, it's a little bit different. You can figure out the different ways you want to try to do this if you're interested. But each principal applicant, so that's the one, as I said earlier, that's administering the grant, you can apply for 2 events and a maximum of 1 activity per SHRF fiscal year. And our fiscal year starts April 1st and it ends March 31st of that following year. So right now we're in the last year of our, last month of our fiscal year. The new one will start April 1st and it'll go until next year. So yeah, you can apply for 1 activity from April to March, but you can apply for 2 events. That being said, there's also restrictions regarding how many, you can have events that are connected to the activity, but only one of those events only one event can be connected to the research activity and can be funded by SHRF, if that makes sense. What we're trying to do is just make sure that not all of the funding is going to one group, and just making sure that it's evenly distributed. But we also know that sometimes, especially when it's an activity, once you've done all the work, again, using maybe the documentary idea, if they had finished up getting everything done with their activity, that they'll then move forward and apply for an event in order to share the documentary. So that is an allowable application time, is that you can apply for 1 event after the activity is done. Again, if you have questions regarding that, you can contact me. Just 3 more slides left. Helpful resources, please go to the RMS, that's our research management system. That's where the application is. That way you can get an idea. We don't have any eligibility or pre-requirements like a letter of intent for research connections. So go ahead, open an application and check it out. We've also started creating how-to videos. So there's specific ways that you have to add people onto your application and everything like that. And we've made a video to show you how to do that. You can find our YouTube channel on our website. And then also make sure that you're reading that program guide. We try to put all of that very specific information that I've talked about into the program guide. And we also create checklists so that it helps you that you've done each step prior to the deadline. So the way that research connections are evaluated, this happens 3 times a year. It's an internal committee involving different individuals within SHRF that come in and look at the application and make sure that it follows the requirements of the grant. And then we follow, when it comes to that, we then follow the evaluation criteria, which you can find on page 8. But very generally, what that criteria includes is, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And how will you know it worked? And so that's all reflected in your application. So what are you doing? That's those goals. How you're doing it is you're showing us in your work plan, or when it comes to the event, maybe you're giving us an agenda to show specifically how you're going to meet the goals. And then the evaluation is important, and that's why you should have it added to your application, because we will be evaluating that to see if you can show us how you'll know if it worked or didn't based on the evaluation. So again, each of those points are then more specifically laid out within the Research Connections program guide. Another thing when it comes to Research Connections for updates is we do ask for a final report. Before, this wasn't mandatory, now it is. So what'll happen is it'll be within 3 months of the end date, or when it comes to the activity. So if you had an activity starting the first of a month, you'll have 1 year, and at the end of that year, you'll need to fill out a report. This is all on the RMS, and there's a video to show you where in the RMS it is. And then when it comes to the event date, it's 3 months following that date. So if you had an event happening on March 28th, you'll need to have the final report completed 3 months after that date. Another thing too is once the review has been completed, and if you've been funded, our communications team may contact you regarding if you'd like swag, if there's going to be any kind of SHRF representation. Sometimes, given what the event might be, we may ask that one of our SHRFies comes out and just maybe gives a brief introduction to the event or anything like that, or we may come out and we can support you when it comes to putting up information on our events or our news. There's some ways that SHRF is able to help out through our communications team. And then also with the event and with your reports, we may follow up regarding stories of success. So we want to start sharing with everyone the information about Research Connections and how it successfully has gotten the information to the knowledge users, or if you learned something from your event that most people might not know about, we want to share that as well. So we may be reaching out to you, but don't hesitate to send us a note too if you want regarding any of your Research Connections and how we could help you. This is probably one of the most important slides, is looking at those deadlines. Research Connections did not used to have deadlines, now it does. Luckily, it happens 3 times a year. So just really make sure, start planning ahead. We try to keep it really clear. So our next deadline is April 10th. So you've got about a month and a couple days. And that would then support, as you can see under the green, it'll support events that are being held May to September, and it'll support an activity that starts on May 1st and goes to April 30th. That being said, again, if you decide to apply for the April 10th deadline, your event could be for January of next year. That's okay. It just won't be able to fund something that's happening in April. So you can always plan ahead and you can apply early. We're okay with that. We like that. But applying late won't help you. Again, if you have questions regarding our deadlines and when, you can send me a note about when your event is and when the best time to apply is, feel free to send that to me. And as you can see, results come out by the end of the month. We do put down April 30th for this upcoming one, but it may come out a bit earlier, just depending on what's going on here with all of our other programs and if we get reviews done early. So that's everything when it comes to the Research Connections grant. This webinar has been recorded and it will be up for your listening time if you want to listen to it again or for specific information. Again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to call me or send me an email. If you have any questions regarding the application for like the technical side of things, Tanya is probably your first line to contact. She'll be able to help you out there. And if she can't do it, I will try, or we have support that'll help us at Smart Simple. So that's everything. If there's any questions, I'll stay on the line for a little bit. Otherwise, I hope you guys all have a great snowy day. Thanks.